Here's what's coming on this episode of Money Life.
Between the Fed and trade policy, you can still feel fairly comfortable and confident in the overall economy. Neither the Fed nor the administration wants to push us over the cliff. We don't want to have a Wile E. Coyote type of moment. So in that worldview, you can hear some confidence coming from CEOs and CFOs about the landscape for their businesses, but it's grinding and the economy is slowing. So in that environment, it's going to be a little harder to achieve those returns, but the returns are still there.
That's Alan McKnight, Chief Investment Officer, Regions Asset Management. And in today's big interview, he talks about how the market has room to go between now and the end of the year, starting a rally that he thinks could last for a while, but you'll have to put up with some volatility to profit from it. But up first, my friend Kathy Christoff, founder and editor at SideHustle.com, is here talking about side hustle income and how you can make the most of your time, your assets, and your money, but how you want to approach it in a way that is not, I feel like making a few extra bucks. Plus,
weird stuff.
Yep, we've also got the weird financial news.
All right, let's start with that.
Well, we're actually going to start with that interview with Kathy Christoff, but we've got the weird financial news and then Alan McKnight. This is Money Life for June the 3rd. I'm your host, Chuck Jaffe. Thank you so much for being here. We've got 3 really fun things today, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. We don't do the weird financial news really often enough. I'm not quite sure why that is, but this one, realistically, this one started with some things that I saw where I said, somebody's missing the financial angle. Like, there's a financial angle here. Let's go get it. So we have a couple of those and a few more things. It's a fun one, and I hope you will enjoy it. It's always fun for me to talk with Kathy Christoff, and I wanted to do it because we are getting to the end of lacrosse season. I worked a game on Monday. I've got a little tournament that I'm doing this weekend. And that will basically get me to the end of the primary lacrosse season. There's some summer tournaments and some things along those lines, some things in the fall. But I basically do this during the spring. And it got me thinking about the way people deal with side hustle income, because I've talked to others about it, and that there's a right way and a wrong way. And there's nobody better to talk to when it comes to side hustle stuff than Kathy Christoff, whose site, SideHustle.com, just got named on a big important list of the best side hustle sites. It was a top 5 site. Yes, it's the one I would go to because for me, it's the Consumer Reports of side hustles. So that is part of what makes it really cool. And you'll learn a little something. If you know people who are doing side hustles, or if you've never thought about it, but you kind of think, yeah, I would like to do it. I mean, there's so many things out there. You're going to hear some things about you can rent out your yard for people to bring their pets to you, to use your yard, things along those lines. Wild stuff. Pools. As somebody who has got a swimming pool, you can rent out your swimming pool if you want to do it. So there's a lot of stuff there that maybe you wouldn't think about. Maybe you'll think about it now. I'm Chuck Jaffe, financial columnist, your host here on Money Life. This show is independent personal finance talk. We try to cover a wide range of approaches and opinions on money and investing. That's why we're going to do something like side hustles. Not all the time. We're much more market focused than that. But I know that a lot of you like it when we kind of go into other areas. So that's what we're doing some of today. But write me and let me know what you're thinking about the show. Chuck@moneylifeshow.com is how you reach me. And I would really appreciate your comments, your questions, your concerns, all that kind of stuff and more. Again, if you're expecting a response from me, I do try to answer as many as I can, but I'm way behind and nothing will happen realistically in terms of me having any dedicated time to email until we get through lacrosse season and the end of it, and I get a little bit of chance to catch my breath. But keep the cards and letters coming. Know that I do read them, even if I'm not responding. I read as much stuff as I possibly can every day. Right now, let's get as much as we can into this show and try to keep ourselves as close to our timing as possible. I've told you what's coming. Kathy Christoff is here for the other interview. When we come back, wow, stay tuned.
Everything an advisor needs in one newsletter. Go to advisorperspectives.com and see why 100,000 advisors are subscribed to our newsletter.
Welcome to the other interview on the June 3rd edition of Money Life. Man, I love my job when I get to talk to my friends, and I will not call her an old friend. We've been friends since we were younger. That only feels like it was a minute ago, but it has been maybe a lot longer. My guest right now is Kathy Christoff. She is the founder and editor at sidehustle.com. Now, Side Hustle, Side, HUSL.com, which was just named one of the top side hustle sites. She is a longtime personal finance journalist. Her book, Investing 101, is still one of the best primers out there. Actually, it's still in my top 5 personal finance books of all time, because when people say, what can I get for a primer? Well, it's the one. It's the one that says, yes, this will do it. It'll give you everything you need to know. And you don't, if you want to move on to something more complicated than 101, fine, but you don't have to. But sidehustle.com is basically, without copyright infringement here, it's the Consumer Reports of side hustles and ways to make money. It's the thing that if you wanted to do a side hustle and you want to find out, does it pay, does it work, etc., she'd be the one you turn to at sidehustle.com. Again, sidehusl.com. Kathy Christoph, it's great to have you back on Money Life.
Well, thanks so much, Chuck. Always a pleasure.
Now, we're going to talk side hustles, but I really want to talk to you because my audience knows that my side hustle, primary side hustle, I guess I have more than one, is that I officiate lacrosse games. I officiate girls lacrosse games, high school and youth levels throughout the spring. And then we'll have the occasional tournament fall and winter, but we're coming to the end of the season. And with that, as I was looking at things going, wow, this has been a good season. I've been healthy. I've made more money than I've ever made in any season before, etc. I recognized that for me, I look at the money that's coming in a very specific fashion because I can afford to. But other people who are taking side hustles, well, maybe it's, oh, I've got to make ends meet. I've got to do this and that. And it occurred to me that for all the money, whether it's side hustles or it's just you got a bonus at work, you got whatever, people need to kind of figure out how to use it, because otherwise, well, I was talking to a ref friend the other day who's like, yeah, it seems like I've already spent everything I made this season. And here we are at the end of the season. So again, my way of thinking about it, I always say I'm doing my side hustle so that I don't have to do other things that I don't like doing. Like I would rather officiate a lacrosse game than cut my grass. So my side hustle money pays for the guy who cuts my grass. But how should people and how do people approach the money when it comes to side hustles? How much of this is my side hustle just gets me over the top and makes sure I get what I need? How much of it is I'm saving because I want to go on that trip around the world or whatever, or buy a car? And how much of this is I don't get by if I don't have side hustles?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's been a lot of research on this. And depending on when the survey's done and how bad inflation is, it's somewhere between 30 and 40% of the people who have side hustles need the side hustle to get by. And then the rest of them have a goal. And that could be paying off an existing debt, or it could be, saving for retirement, or it could just be vacations or some other luxury that you wouldn't have been able to afford before. But there's certainly a lot of people who this is part of the budget. And so kind of like you're talking about, oh, gee, okay, what do I do when this season is over? And that's one of the things I like to try and address with our site. Because like for you, refereeing, right? It's great side hustle. There's great need, but you could also coach. And so in your off season for refereeing, there are 3 sites. One's called Athletes Untapped. Another one is called Coach Up. And another one is called Teach Me To. And depending on what your sport is and where you are in the country, one of those could help you find students for your personal coaching business. You set your rates. You decide when you meet people, their schedule, whatever, and they just help you market and collect, which is kind of nice. I mean, that's the part of the side hustle that I don't want to do, right? And so I kind of think it makes sense to pay somebody else to do that part for you.
Well, it does. And it raises that issue. I mean, obviously, I could go officiate other sports. I could do that, which is what a lot of officials do, a lot of people who referee. But then, as I point out, then it's not really a side hustle. It's just a hustle. It's an all the time hustle. How much for some people is a side hustle supposed to be a side hustle? It is, in other words, it's one thing to take on a job and go, hey, I want to earn a little extra money. I can do it, or I'm doing something that I really like. It's a very different thing to go, I'm doing this indefinitely and permanently, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly. And again, the people who are doing side hustles, and there's so many of them now. I mean, it's again, every survey differs in this because there's some definitional problems with the side hustle market, but every person is doing it for a different reason. I ran into a guy the other day who was working 16-hour days. He finished his day job and worked for Uber and Lyft for another 8 hours. And the reason why was because he and his wife just bought a house and the closing costs were $7,000 more than what they anticipated. And so, in a very short period of time, he needed to come up with a whole heck of a lot of cash. And so, his side hustle is like a 2-month period, and then I'm done. And then I'm going to go back to having a life. Right. I run into other people who are just like, well, I have some free time. There's certain things I like to do. I mean, a lot of the people who side hustle with Rover, for instance, they just like the idea, okay, in the middle of the day, I'm going to walk the dog or walk somebody's dog and I'm gonna get some fresh air, and I'm gonna make a little extra money, and over the course of a month, I'm gonna earn an extra $600. Not bad, right? And if you throw that into your retirement plan or you throw that into your vacation fund or whatever, it has a significant impact on your life. And then there's a whole 'nother group who are kinda testing out a lifestyle change, like they're investment bankers or they're, like in some industry where their day job is really a job. It's like a grind and they don't want to stay there, but they don't really know what they can viably do. And so they test out a side hustle in as a passion project. And they kind of, just put their foot in with the amount of free time that they have to figure out whether they can make that at some point into their main hustle. And it's so delightful when you run into people who do this, like because all of a sudden they go, art was always my passion, but how do you, like starving artist, that's all I ever heard. Right. And I didn't want to starve. And so, how do I make this into a living? And it's kind of amazing in this market that we're in that absolutely anything you do, you can make more money at it than you think. And it's way more wide ranging than you imagine. I mean, I know but we've rated more than 500 online platforms that allow you to make money. And it's everything. It's everything from art and photography to cooking and engineering. There's a side hustle platform that we're about to review that's all just any STEM subject. You're into life sciences, they're gonna help you find a side gig. There's, project management companies. There's the number that address kind of professional industries are soaring, and that's really cool for people like my sister who is a lawyer and decided, "I don't wanna work full time." Like, when she was raising her kids, she was just like and every law firm, it was like, "Okay, you've gotta work 60-hour weeks." Didn't work, but in today's market, if she wants to work 20 hours a week, no problem. I can, throw you 10 side hustle platforms where you can find that part-time work, and you really can kind of have it all in this market. I mean, like, when I was growing up, that's what they were always talking about. "Oh, you can have it all." It's like, yeah, and a nervous breakdown too. But right now, you can really do it as a side hustle, which is cool.
Well, and again, it's what I love about the idea that, for me, whether with the coaching, which I've also done as a side hustle, but whether it's coaching or it's reffing or what have you, I'd far rather be on the field than just about any other place. And so there's a ton of stuff that, yes, I don't have to feel bad that like, wait, how, why am I not cutting my grass anymore? I'm not cutting my grass anymore because I'm out on a field and cutting my grass. There's always a tournament I do every fall where they pay you by check. And when you go out, they go, who should I make the check out to? And I'm like, let's make it out to my yard guy. He's doing the fall cleanup. Just send it directly to him because that's what I was here today doing the leaves.
Then you don't have to pay tax on it. Oh, okay, perfect.
There you go. So all of that, when you put it together, how much of this also should be that people pursue their passions or can make it that realistically, if you can monetize what you love to do, you can outsource what you don't like to do. Like,
Exactly.
is that another significant reason why side hustles are going and maybe taking off in that category like your sister?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I really think that the generations coming up, the millennials and Gen Z, are much more about quality of life than some of us older people. We were all about, succeeding, and there were the Gordon Geckos, and, like whatever you did, whatever it was to earn X amount of money, whatever it made you feel successful and fabulous. And now I think that the generations are looking at the older generations and saying, "And what did they get for that?" Like, really, are they happier? Are they healthier? Did the companies that they worked their butts off for, are they, really loyal to these employees? No, not really. And so now let's look at what makes your life richer. And how do you, I mean, instead of looking at riches in terms of piles of money, let's look at riches in terms of like a really good life. And I do think that that's where the side hustle market is going to. Again, it just allows you to experiment with your passion projects, and it's not all of them will result in, full-time income, but maybe you don't need a full-time income from that. Maybe you can live on a little bit less in order to have a little bit more of the lifestyle that you wanna have. And so as long as the lifestyle isn't a Ferrari, then, you're good, It's more like gardening.
Well, if the lifestyle is monthly payments on the Ferrari, you can probably find a way to do that. If it's buying the Ferrari for cash, it can take you a little longer. But the other side of this is, what percentage of people start side hustles and then just go, side hustling is not for me? Because there's so many things out there. I mean, if somebody has a conversation, we've had this discussion before, and they start to hear you talk about side hustles, like, yeah, there's a side hustle for everything. Just because you think it's Uber and DoorDash doesn't mean that that's what you're relegated to. But what percentage of people start side hustling and then go, yeah, it's not for me?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of churn, and particularly in what I consider to be the lower tier side hustles like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Grubhub, whatever, Instacart. Those side hustles are generally not fun. They're generally things that you do in order to make money, and you have an immediate need. It addresses it. They run through people very quickly. But now, do those people then find a better side hustle? Sometimes. And this is one of the things too that I want sidehustle.com to address is that I don't want you to get burned out on this whole industry because you picked the wrong platform to devote your time to, because there is a timelessness about the side hustle world that if you recognize and you get the right side hustles for the right time in your life and it's something that you enjoy doing, it can continue on. And we're seeing right now a lot of retirees doing side hustles, and it's not a full-time income. It's, just an extra couple $100 here and there, but it's something that keeps their toe into a market that they like. It's something, I mean, again, I see a lot of paintings, people who find a way to take the photography and earn, kind of passive income with it, or take an asset that they already have, like their backyard, and turn it into a dog park with a site like Sniff Spot or with a Swimply or a Gigster or a Vay. All of these different sites will help you rent out this asset that you have, or for storage space. I mean, God, the number of people who have stuff that they need to store someplace else. Well, now your closet can be their storage space. And talk about a passive income side hustle. Nobody ever visits the stuff they have in storage. So you put it in your closet and then collect rent on it for a year, and then maybe sometime somebody will take their stuff away and give it away or do whatever they should, or put it back into their house. I don't know, but the point is, it doesn't have to be something where you're actively involved and it's hard. It can be almost anything. So you should be searching for the right stuff instead of the stuff that everybody knows about because they advertise. And they advertise because they need people, because people don't like them. Once you've worked for Uber for so long, you're like, "I'm out of here," right?
Yeah. Everyone I've ever met who has worked for Uber that has liked Uber, because I'm sure you do too, talk to your Uber drivers. The only ones I've ever had who liked it were the ones who truly had it as a side hustle, who said, I do this to get out of the house. do whatever. I'm a retiree or a semi-retiree. I pick up a couple hours. If the drive takes me to an interesting part of town where there's a favorite restaurant, awesome, let's go. I stop taking, assignments or whatever and make the most of it. Everybody else has been miserable about it. Before I wind up leaving myself getting tons of email, you better tell everybody what the sites are that allow you to rent out your storage space.
Oh gosh, Neighbor, Stash. I'm trying to think. There's several of them, but you can search my site by just go rent, and then it will say storage space. And so each of the sites have a different geographic footprint. So the one that will work for you depends on where you are. But I think Neighbor is the biggest of them all, and so most likely to be available in your neighborhood. And yeah, and they're great. They just take a 10% commission off the top and they find you the renters and again you go. It's so 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 easy. I mean the sniff spot one too is a great thing. It essentially you're renting out your yard to be a dog park. And so the amenities that really will make your yard stand out is, for instance, a mud puddle or a tennis ball, you know, and the rules of the site is that you have to leave the place in the same condition that it was in before you came. So they're going to pick up after their own dog. And you can just, like put a sign on the gate, your hours are here to here. You must be out by this time is the more important thing. And you do it by the hour. So, the typical rental is about $20 an hour. You can do that all day. You can make a fair amount of money.
Getting back to sort of my point in having you on the show, as I get to the end of lacrosse season and I consider the money and the end of it, how important is it for people to enter side hustling with an idea of what they want to do, even if it's just, I want to save, I want to do whatever, I want to, pay for this thing I don't want to do, et cetera. How important is that towards happiness? Because we can talk about all the things that you guys study, but I could put somebody on your site, tell them, go find it. It's the best one out there, do, et cetera. And yet if they come in with the wrong attitude or they don't have a goal or whatever, they're just going to kind of flounder, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably gonna write a book because some of this stuff is too big for just the website. But yeah, I think there are different side hustles for different goals. And it's the stuff that we just talked about with the guy who was dealing with closing costs. For that sort of a problem or for that sort of goal, an Uber, a Lyft, a DoorDash, a Grubhub, a Instacart, those actually fit because you can sign up, you can start tomorrow. It's quick, it's fairly reliable income, but you have very little control over the long term. If you want a side hustle to kind of transition you into a different career, well, then you want to kind of look at, what are your passions and that sort of thing. We do have a quiz on the site to try and lead people through kind of their interest, skills, and resources and match them with a side hustle that they would find appropriate. But, there's also just you search by industry group. If you really want to get into art, search our site for different opportunities with art. There are probably 25 of them. And some of them you can make a real living at. I mean, I know people now who make 5 and 6 figures with voiceovers, and they're not doing it full time. And 5 and 6 figures with animations, and they're not doing it full time. It's a pretty wild and wonderful world when you get to the right sites. You get to the wrong sites, and it's a nightmare because they'll steal your pay. They'll do, they'll lie to you in all sorts of ways. But if you get the right sites, it really can be fun and rewarding.
Kathy, it is always fun and rewarding to have you on the show. Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll talk again down the line, but always great to catch up with you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Talk to you soon.
That's Kathy Christoff. She's founder and editor at sidehustle.com, sidehusl.com for more information. Coming up on Money Life, Alan McKnight from Regions Investment Management. But first,
Weird stuff.
the weird financial news. We haven't done it for a while, and you don't want to miss it. It's coming up when we come back in just a moment.
To navigate today's complex market, investors need accessible, quality research. Vetify offers free webcasts from portfolio experts and industry leaders. Earn CE credits and take your portfolio to the next level. Go to etftrends.com/webcasts and learn more.
Ladies and gentlemen, an extraordinary journey into the unknown awaits you. The unimaginably weird. Something weird.
Welcome to the Weird Financial News, where we talk about the unusual and strange things that people do for, with, and about their money. And that means that as much as I would love to chat about the small town in Western France that recently set a world record for the greatest number of people dressed in Smurf costumes gathered in one place, and by the way, the number was over 3,000, I need to focus on where dollars come into play. And so we start with a couple of stories that you may have heard about, but where the money angles were perhaps downplayed in any of the coverage. And that's what brings us to Brockworth, England, which on May 26 hosted its annual cheese rolling competition. You know, the one where you've seen contestants, some dressed as superheroes, some dressed this year as crash test dummies, and no matter what they're wearing, there's not going to be bubble wrap or protective padding, and you see them tumbling head over tea kettle down a 200-yard perilously steep hill in pursuit of a speeding wheel of double Gloucester cheese.
What are you, crazy?
Yeah, that's what you're thinking. And the contest is traditionally held in late May near Gloucester, about 90 miles west of London. It dates back at least 2 centuries, maybe more. It is attended by thousands who pack the woods flanking the hill, take cover behind fences at the bottom, and they watch these folks basically let gravity and acceleration make it that few runners are on their feet, which leads to epic wipeouts. And face it, it's less of a race than it is a prize for the idiot who falls the fastest.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
Yes, but they're all falling really fast. But is glory all that people are chasing? I don't think so, because I love cheese.
Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Now, look, I'm a goalie when I play lacrosse, so I'm very familiar with the concept that pain is temporary, chicks dig scars, and glory lasts forever. But watching these people damn near kill themselves, and let me make it clear that the person who won the women's event this year was counted rolling and somersaulting downhill at least a dozen times on her way to the bottom and seemed to have a concussion.
What are you, stupid?
Yeah, you have to wonder about the part of the story that the media never discusses, and that's the cost of a decent double Gloucester, which is going to set you back anywhere from $13 to $20 a pound. So you've got a rolling edible C-note, maybe as much as like $140, $150, waiting for you at the bottom, possibly with somebody's blood on it, because it's been known to hurt the people at the bottom who try to stop it after it gets thrown off a cliff. I'm not sure what bouncing, by the way, does for the cheese, whether it would enhance the flavor or ruin it, but frankly, even a cheese lover should be questioning whether or not it's worth it.
If I'm going to get weird, I'm going to need to see a professional.
Well, the Weird Financial News next moves to Kentucky, where a woman is not feeling like she's a professional, but she does feel a bit like this.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Yeah. Holly LaFavors found out when she came out of her house to find stacks of boxes containing Dum Dum lollipops that her 8-year-old son Liam put in an order for 70,000 Dum Dum suckers. But by the way, she found out about it basically as they were arriving, and it was too late. Amazon had delivered 22 cases to her home by the time she started trying to say, stop. Liam told Holly that he wanted to have a carnival, and he was ordering the Dum Dums as prizes for his carnival. He was just being friendly. Yeah. And he was being friendly to the tune of about $4,000 for the order. LaFavor said when she saw what the number was, she just about fainted. Okay, that's reasonable. But then she found out that there are 8 more cases that were unaccounted for. After a trip to the post office, they wound up finding those cases and returned them to sender. But her efforts to get a refund took a little more time, right? She worked with the bank. She talked to some news stations. Only after she got the press did Amazon call and say, okay, they're going to refund her money. That is part of why you get these stories in the weird financial news, because sometimes that's what it takes, because the charges were legitimate, which is why Lefevre's has now changed some settings on her phone to make sure that her son can't do this and there's never another surprise delivery at home. Next, we go to the mountains in Japan, and you may have heard this story, and when you did, you may have thought,
Boy, are you dumb!
at least for the climber who was airlifted with altitude sickness from near the peak of Mount Fuji, and then went back 4 days later and had to be rescued a second time.
Off the chart dumb.
Yeah. He was only identified as a 27-year-old Chinese student living in Japan. He made an emergency call back in April, was airlifted after developing symptoms of altitude sickness. By the way, police found him and found out that his climbing irons were damaged, that he wasn't really well equipped. But then, a couple days later, he returned to the mountains trail about 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet above sea level, to look for his cell phone.
What a dumb thing to do.
Yeah, and other things that he left behind. He gets up there and another climber finds him unable to move because he developed altitude sickness for a second time.
Plan to be surprised.
Yeah. He's like, oh, altitude sickness the first time. I'll just go back. It won't be a problem this time. No, of course not. So he develops altitude sickness for the second time. They get him and they rescue him. And here's where the money comes in, right? Mount Fuji's hiking trails are only officially open from July to early September. You may have noticed he was climbing at the end of April. There's no penalty for climbing off-season. There's also no charge when a climber needs to be rescued. Yeah. So in other words,
you can't fix stupid.
No, because you're not giving them any sort of motivation to not do this. But that's what's happened, is that the Chinese student's case has prompted an uproar, generating calls for him to be charged, at least for the second rescue. What you've got, and remember, Mount Fuji is like 12,500 feet tall, is officials in Japan calling for new rules to charge climbers who require rescue from Mount Fuji, at least outside of the official climbing season. Yeah, mayors and a governor and a couple of other folks have gotten behind it because the cost of a rescue helicopter can mean about $3,500 an hour, according to the governor of Shizuoka, who's one of the people pushing for this. And that's then with mountain and rescue teams and other stuff on the ground waiting for you, etc. Yeah. By the way, summiting Mount Fuji during climbing season requires a reservation and a fee of $27 and a test that you have to pass based on a short orientation class. And if this had happened in North America, yes, there are plenty of cases. And in fact, a number of states have laws that say if they got to come rescue you, you're going to wind up paying the cost of it. Next, we go to Switzerland, where you think of the people as peace-loving and everything else, but a Swiss politician was fined for buying pink water pistols online because authorities say that the toys violated the weapons law. Yeah, it's the country's weapons law. Mark Jastel, a member of the local council in Buchs, a town west of Zurich, ordered the water pistols through a low-cost retailer as a gift for his godchildren. And he wound up being charged 6,500 francs. That's almost $7,500 for a violation of the weapons law. Yeah.
I need to understand normal.
Yep. By the way, he was not aware of the violation, but he accepted the penalty and paid the fine. So he spent $7,500 to buy his godchildren pink water pistols. And last on the weird financial news, we have come to the point where they got sentencing in a long-running case. It was just resolved finally in the last week or so. A long-running case in Great Britain where it was not your typical smash and grab burglary. It was a golden toilet. Yeah, and it actually was a functioning golden toilet because it was a satirical work of art titled America by Italian conceptual artist Maurizio Catalan, and it poked fun at excessive wealth. It weighed over 215 pounds. It was insured for $6 million. It was stolen in 2019. The value of the gold at that point was $3.5 million. Guess what? Worth a heck of a lot more than that now. The piece, by the way, had been on display at the Guggenheim Museum And the idea was that it was, yes, a working toilet.
I love gold.
Yep. But not for that purpose, I don't think. I know what you're thinking. We're not going there. We're not talking about who else might want a golden toilet. No. They wound up convicting the thieves, but they've never found the toilet because it was basically broken up and sold. Yeah, but in the court case, one of the thieves did answer questions about having used the toilet the day before the heist, and he described the experience as, and I quote, splendid. And that is truly
something weird.
We don't do it too often, but I love getting to the weird financial news. But I also love talking about all things financial. And up next, Alan McKnight from Regions Asset Management. He will be here for the big interview when we come back in just a moment.
Never trust a weirdo.
VettaFi is the partner asset managers rely on across the entire product lifecycle. Learn how you can build and support the product of your dreams at VettaFi.com.
Welcome to the big interview on the June 3rd edition of Money Life. Returning to the show today, Alan McKnight. He's Chief Investment Officer at Regions Asset Management, regions.com for more information. Alan McKnight, it's great to have you back on Money Life.
It is always a pleasure, Chuck.
Let's jump in with where we are right now, because here we are entering June, which means we're at that time of year where people are going to take mid-year outlooks. And the irony is that if you just look at the year as a starting point in January and where we're at now, and you don't look at the day-to-day volatility, the year's been kind of flat and looks like it would be benign. But we know that churning underneath that, it's been really, really, volatile, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So as we get to the turn, as you're looking at the turn for the second half of the year, how are you sizing things up? Is this a positive second half, or the things we've worried about in the first half, they're all going to hit home in the second half?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the fact that if you were to have gone to sleep on December 31st and just woken up, you would have thought everything going on today was much ado about nothing, and that really nothing had happened in the first 5 months of the year. And yet here we are. We're effectively flat in domestic equity markets. We've had some ups and downs along the way in various sectors, but as we look forward, the thing that we're really focused on is we think domestic equity markets can do better. We actually think they can outperform through the second half of the year, particularly compared to international equities. International finally has caught up this year, which has been the one bright spot, I would say, across equity markets, is that international is finally doing well again after a multi-year period of underperformance. But we think that's going to reverse a bit in the second half. We don't think that particularly international developed looks as good as domestic mid-cap and some other equities. And so we think there's still some opportunity out there, but it won't be without volatility. And that would be the other big theme for the second half of the year for us.
So when we talk about doing better as in we're going to be up at the end of the year and we're going to be up maybe double digits, or we're just going to be, a trend that brings us up, but not, to where we go, 2025 turned out to be a great year.
Well, it's a great point because we don't envision what we saw in 23 and 24. When you look at 23 and 24, phenomenal years for the stock market. We think we can eke out a mid-single digit type of return this year. And yet if you'd asked us that a month ago, we would have said, I don't know, it's pretty difficult out there. But to get to that mid-single digit return, we think you're going to experience a fair amount of volatility. Exactly what we've experienced over the last couple of months between trade policy and immigration and the broader geopolitical issues out there. It's not going to be without some gnashing of teeth along the way.
Which are you most concerned with at this point? Are you most concerned with tariff policy or Fed policy?
We're in the camp of trade policy. And more than anything else, it's because if you think about any business, they just want to know what the guidelines and guardrails are going to be. Whether you're a large public company or a small business, you want to understand what are the rules going to be. For the same reason that if you're a lacrosse player, you need to know what can I or can't I do? And if you can't do certain things, just let me know that and I won't do them anymore. Unfortunately, with tariff and trade policy, those rules are changing on a daily, if not weekly basis. So it's really hard to allocate capital if you don't know where you're going to be penalized in the future. And so we think trade policies are looking to be the biggest question mark. So if we can get some of that behind us, we think that markets can start to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief.
And if trade policy is your first concern, what's your read on the Fed?
Our thought is the Fed will cut rates somewhere between 2 and 3 times, but it's going to be back end loaded at the end of this year, because if you look at the data right now in terms of growth in the economy, where we are from an unemployment perspective, inflation, there's really not a need right now to try to initiate more cuts right now. And so as we look out over the course of the year, we think that the economy may slow down a little bit, particularly because of the trade policy and some of the immigration constraints. But the bottom line is the Fed is going to wait a bit until they have more data to look at and feel comfortable and confident that they need to initiate some cuts to try to a certain degree, juice the economy. And that we're just not there yet.
So now I want to put those last two answers together because, of course, I gave you trade policy or Fed policy as which would be your concern. And I'm curious if when you put those answers together, what you actually have is that for all the worries, you have something that is giving you some measure of confidence or calm in that trade policy, while uncertain, is currently at least limited by what the courts are saying. So it would seem like we're going to see tariffs, but we're not going to see the massive tariffs. And Fed policy is limited by what we see in the data, since the Fed has said it's going to be data dependent. So we're expecting cuts, but we're not expecting much to happen too soon, et cetera. Does that basically mean we're range bound, that as long as those two things apply, you can look at this market and go, it's going to be kind of in a range, because while those things are overhanging, can't go too far in either direction?
You nailed it, Chuck, and you said it much better than I could have. And I think it's this concept of range bound where over the course of the year and over the course of the next 12 months, you can see improvement, you can see returns within the stock market, but it's not going to be without some ups and downs. And that range-bound element to it, that between the Fed and trade policy, you can still feel fairly comfortable and confident in the overall economy. Neither the Fed nor the administration wants to push us over the cliff. We don't want to have a Wile E. Coyote type of moment. So in that worldview, you can hear some confidence coming from CEOs and CFOs about the landscape for their businesses, but it's grinding and the economy is slowing. So in that environment, it's going to be a little harder to achieve those returns, but the returns are still there.
So what are you going to suggest people do to achieve those returns? Where are we leaning into? You've already said you expect domestic to outperform international, although international has been a godsend for investors who didn't like what was going on here. So how much are you tilting or pulling back from one to the other, and what else are you doing?
So one, we're tilting from international developed into mid-cap in the U.S., and it's specifically because we think mid-cap companies here have some of the benefits of large caps in terms of a broader distribution base, broader client set, while they also are still nimble enough, similar to their small cap brethren, to be able to go out and find new opportunities, to grow in new markets, to grow in new solution and product sets. So we think mid-cap domestic companies can actually do quite well in this environment. We also think that because valuations have been so low in that realm, that they'll get a bit of a tailwind of just getting some improvement from a valuation perspective and getting closer to where they have historically traded. International developed, to your point, has been a godsend to investors this year. It's been a story and a narrative. We've been talking about the benefits of diversification. It's finally working after a couple of years where it was really tough to hold international stocks. But we now think that trade has passed a bit, and you're better served to be reallocating within the domestic world in the U.S.
I want to dig in a little on the point on mid caps, because you said that mid caps have some of the benefits of large caps. And I'm curious if that is all about the cap size, or if some of that is about the changing face of mid caps because of what we saw with the market being so concentrated. One of the things that has happened with the Mag 7 is that, of course, you wind up with them taking up such a big part of the cap weightings for the S&P 500 that a lot of companies that used to be large cap aren't large cap anymore, right? There's not that many large cap growth stocks, et cetera. But what that has also meant, and every time I say it, I point out, I'm still shocked to be saying it, that things like General Motors is now a mid-cap stock. Maybe it's because I grew up in the 60s, 70s and went to college in Michigan in the 1980s and covered GM in my first real business journalism job, that one stuns me. But when you talk about mid-caps being in a potential sweet spot, is it in part because we're going to see the large cap stuff that we've seen just kind of trickle down? And oh, by the way, the largest mid-caps really are still large caps. They're just kind of, it's an accounting trick that makes them mid-caps now.
That's true. I think part of it is this reality because of the Mag 7 and because of some of these really super multinational companies that have garnered all the interest in so much capital over the last couple of years. There are a lot of companies that have been left behind, if you will, and whether it be GM or other mid-sized companies, they haven't received the level of attention and interest from investors. And so, yes, you'll have some that's just the trickle-down effect of people moving out of some of the larger names and some of even the Magnificent Seven names who may not be able to grow at the same rate that they have historically. I think you will also just see more interest and attention within med caps, to your point, on companies that maybe haven't received the level of or a degree of attention, interest by institutional investors in recent years, that they're going to sharpen the pencil and maybe do a bit more work on them now. We certainly are, and we think that there's that opportunity set to see a reallocation of capital.
If we're looking at mid caps picking up, does the rally wind up getting to small caps? Do we ever see the small cap rally that people have been hoping for years now?
I wish I could say that we thought it would, but unfortunately, I think small caps are going to be challenged in a slowing economic world, in an environment where there's a lot less clarity or transparency as it relates to trade, and even on the immigration front, on some of the things that may be challenged there. We think it's going to be difficult for small caps. They also have less access to capital, and if the cost of capital continues to be relatively high compared to what it's been in recent years, we think that small caps are going to be challenged a bit longer. So that's why we've really put more of an emphasis on mid caps, because we think they have better access to capital, are not going to be as impacted by a lot of trade policy, and therefore better set up. And small caps are going to struggle still, unfortunately.
You talked about international and moving from developed international to mid cap. What's your take on emerging markets, and also specifically on China among emerging markets? Because that's where you've got a lot of the action caused by tariffs, but that's also where there's a lot of short-term stuff that traders can make money off of. Can long-term investors make money there?
We think long-term investors can make money in emerging markets, but you have to be very laser-focused on the countries you're investing in. And to your point on China, we think the tariff trade discussion with China will be ongoing. This is the opening salvo this year, but it's not going to get materially better in the years to come. So we're more hesitant on China, despite hearing from a lot of folks that valuations are cheap, large population, large growth opportunity. But we're just a little more circumspect about that right now, and prefer some of those emerging market areas that are a bit more opportunistic as it relates to their interactions on trade, such as maybe a Brazil and India. And they can still do well, but it's not going to be for the faint of heart. And we think that emerging markets play an important role in investor portfolios, but you're going to have heightened volatility.
As you look forward, you've talked about what's going on this year. It does not sound like you've got recession in the short-term forecast, but recessions haven't been canceled. How much do you worry that the economic numbers that we're worrying about now become the hard data of tomorrow, and that we do wind up with a recession in 2026 or 7?
We're concerned about it, but to your point, we don't have it as our base case. We think that we can still thread the needle via some agreements in trade, the FOMC at the end of the year coming in and improving the landscape for rates. But it certainly has gotten more dicey in recent months. And the amount of noise around trade policy specifically is creating a bit more concern from our perspective on whether we get pushed into a recession. Now, even if we do go into a recession, I think we always anchor to the most recent recession. So people think about what happened during COVID, what happened during the great financial crisis. There are a lot of recessions that occur where, yes, it is impactful and it hurts the economy, but you weather through it and you navigate, and things, you get to the other side without as much pain and suffering as you might think. And so that's the one somewhat silver lining, although there's not much silver there, that if we were to go into recession, we don't think it would be a significant one and a significant drawdown.
With all of the focus having been on tariffs and on the volatility that's caused and the Fed, where in your concern level do we get what we see when it comes to the activity in Congress and their ability to pass bills, et cetera, that might make it that we wind up cutting the national debt? Because that's got its own potential for problems down the line. How are you starting to factor those potential problems in, or do you not factor them in until they go from potential to real?
We're certainly watching them, and I think the lack of real movement on the deficit and long-term debt is problematic and troubling to us. And so as we think about our economic base case, it's not a this year or next year problem, but the longer we push it out, the more difficult it's going to be to make any real headway. And that has an impact on rates in terms of what outside investors are willing to pay for our debt and what rate level we have to use to incent them to come buy our debt. We have been the benefits of capital allocation in the U.S. for many years now in the global trade world, and that's not a base case. People don't have to continue to invest in our debt, and you can get into one of these spirals where we continue to see deficits run higher, the debt stay higher, and outside investors say we're going to demand a higher rate for that, which then increases your interest cost, which then increases the deficit even more. And so it can become that vicious cycle. So we're watching it closely. We're just hopeful that calmer minds will prevail and realize that and start to do some work on it.
Given that, where are you suggesting people invest on the fixed income side of things? What are we doing with duration as we get to a more normalized yield curve? And you also have all of these other kind of overarching concerns. But at a time when people are looking for income, where are you suggesting they find it? And not just on the fixed income side, are there areas in the stock market where you're suggesting people go towards income?
Certainly. So right now we do think that you can still make money in fixed income. We would be skewing to shorter duration as well as more on the corporate credit side, because I think companies are actually in pretty good shape right now as it relates to their balance sheet. So we like both of those names or both of those sectors within fixed income. And the reality is bonds actually generate return again after a multi-year period where it was so punitive to bond investors with such low rates, abnormally low rates compared to history, that yes, there are some challenges if we see rates starting to inch higher, but at least you can actually deliver a return again that you didn't get even 3-4 years ago.
Lastly, is there anything out there that we have not discussed yet that you have on your list of things like, I really want to make sure everybody's factoring this in at this point, given where things are?
The biggest one for us is volatility when you're thinking about your allocations, because as much as we talk about it, we present it in our themes and one of the trends, until you're in the middle of it, it's really easy to lose sight of just how impactful that is as it relates to your psychology. We saw that in April when the market has a huge drawdown. You're fielding an inordinate number of calls around going to cash, around getting out of the markets, and you're rewarded for patience. It's not easy. It can be incredibly stressful, but that's exactly why you build a diversified portfolio. That's why you turn off the monitor when it's problematic on any given day or week. But over the long term, there's no free lunch, and you need to have some modicum of risk in a portfolio to generate return. And so be patient. Don't allow the whims and vagaries of the market to drive you to make poor decisions, and stay focused on the long term.
Alan, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for joining me on the show. We'll talk to you again down the line as we watch it play out.
Thanks so much for having me, Chuck.
That's Alan McKnight. He's Chief Investment Officer at Regions Asset Management. Go to regions.com if you are looking for more information on him or the firm. And we will come back to put a bow on this show to set you up for the rest of the week. So stick around. The finish line is in sight, and we will cross it together when Money Life for June the 3rd wraps up after this message. We're back to wrap this one up. We're going to take very little time because we let everything else run long today, which is why I did not explain to you, I mentioned the Smurf thing that I didn't talk about in the weird financial news. I just talked about the fact that it had happened. And maybe it was a financial thing because look at how many people came together. So you had this event with over 3,000 people dressed as Smurfs. I just would like to point out that, in my lifetime, the largest gathering of people dressed as Smurfs was a Halloween party when I was in college. And Al Martin, defenseman on my team, very large man, didn't just dress as a Smurf, like let me wear a blue top and whatever, and then just paint my face. He actually did everything from the waist up in blue body paint. And he was blue for like 2 weeks. Just saying. It's one of those memories. And yes, I was dressed as a Smurf too. Tomorrow, another great show. Jordan Rizzuto from Gamma Road will be here. That's the interview that we had to cancel because their signal was changing. So we'll talk all about where the signal is now and what's going on. And speaking of signals, Brad Lamensdorf from the Lamensdorf Market Timing Report, who I know is a favorite guest for a lot of you, has not been on the show for like almost a year. He will be back on the show tomorrow as well. So lock us in and plan to be here. Meanwhile, if you're looking to do something today, it's National Repeat Day. If you're looking for something to do today, it's National Repeat Day. Yeah, well, repeating things can be good, I suppose. It is also National Egg Day.
The incredible edible egg.
And if you're going to celebrate that one, I'm not sure you want to do it this way.
I can eat 50 eggs.
Don't try to eat 50 eggs. Just like 1 or 2 is fine. It's also National Chocolate Macaroon Day.
Chocolate.
And it's World Cider Day. I love a good cider. I definitely do. My favorite, by the way, is from Carlson Orchards. Carlson Orchards in Massachusetts is now much more widely available. If you've never tried it, check it out. If you have questions about which one is the best, I will tell you because I've tried them all. Thanks to my guests, Kathy Christoff, founder and editor at sidehustle.com. Side Hustle, SIDEHUSL. Plus Alan McKnight, Chief Investment Officer, Regions Asset Management, which is online at regions.com. Thanks to them. Thanks to Rob Floyd, my producer. Thanks to Maho, my dog. And he's actually not making that noise right now. He's asleep at my feet. But mostly thanks to you for being here because you make this special and worthwhile for me each and every day. The Money Life quote of the day comes from Idowu Koyenikan, who said, when money realizes that it is in good hands, it wants to stay and multiply in those hands. Yeah, so treat money with respect and it will respect you back and hopefully love you, and that'll make it easier for you to remember that until we do this again the next time, that the best thing you could do for your money is not worry too much about it. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe and calm. We'll see you here again tomorrow.
The people who appear on Money Life are here for your and their own entertainment. Don't take advice from us or any other podcast without doing more research and/or consulting your financial advisor. We believe our guests provide reliable information, but we can't and don't guarantee the accuracy or completeness of their statements. Opinions expressed on Money Life are those of the host and guests only and reflect their personal thinking. They're not representative policy or strategy of any employers or sponsors. This show is produced by Money Life Radio, which retains all rights to the content. If you want to use any part of this show for your own purposes, be they good or evil, you must get our written permission first. And remember, with great financial information comes great responsibility. Please act responsibly.
Just want to get the hell out of here.